Welcome to this first Agri-FoodTech Climate Summit webinar. It's great to have such a great global audience. I'm drinking coffee here in New Zealand. I know that some of you are drinking wine in the UK. It's great to see you all. My name is Peter Hilton. I'm founder and CEO of Wharf42. I'm delighted today to be joined by two fantastic panelists, Dr. Victoria Hatton, who is the COP26 Pacific Regional Climate Change Advisor based at the British High Commission in Wellington. And I think Victoria has by far and away the best location today. I can notice from the stand that she appears to be at Eden Park in Auckland. So congratulations, Victoria, for managing to book that out for this morning's presentation. And also Rob Ward, who is the founder and CEO at forwardfoodtech, and also is the lead agritech deal maker at the UK Department of International Trade's Global Entrepreneur Programme. And it's interesting for me, just speaking very briefly of that programme. I'm actually an alumni of it. I was in cohort number 1 about 12 or 13 years ago, so I do have some history with the GEP programme. So really as an introduction to the session, obviously the past 12 months have been some of the most challenging that many of us have ever faced. The global COVID pandemic has impacted on individuals and businesses like never before. And faced with this kind of unprecedented human health crisis, the world has responded. Governments, pharmaceutical companies and researchers have managed to develop vaccines in 10 months that would traditionally have taken 5 to 10 years. To me, that demonstrates what can be done when the need is urgent. Governments, researchers, industry and investors can collaborate together on a global scale. With climate change now beginning to also manifest itself with increasingly damaging and life-threatening extreme weather events, I'm thinking of my friends across the Tasman here in Australia. This time in Sydney, this time last year, they were suffering terrible bushfires. This year, terrible floods. No one knows what 2022 or 2023 have got in store, but clearly the world is facing no less of an emergency. And at Wharf42, we've been focused on how the world's agri-food tech sector can begin to collaborate across borders to address some of the major challenges facing farmers and growers. And we do have some history in this space. So personally, I'm currently head of global alliances at Agritech New Zealand, also senior advisor to the Australian Agritech Association, external advisor to the Agri-FoodTech Singapore Association, and then working currently with a number of both existing and emerging agritech ecosystems in both North America and Europe. And what those conversations have basically proved to me is that undeniably modern agriculture and food production and distribution are in themselves major contributors of greenhouse gases. You can pick the number, but typically agriculture might be responsible for up to, say, 14% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And if we look at broader rural land use, the impact could be even larger. However, on the flip side, the changing climate is also having far-reaching impact on farmers and growers in terms of sustainable agricultural production at a time when the growing global population is expected to reach 10 billion people by 2050, requiring a significant increase in the production of nutritious and affordable food. And it's against that background that that focus has really led us to look at different platforms or potential platforms that could be leveraged to connect global agribusinesses, agritech startups, researchers, governments, and investors into a truly collaborative framework to begin to address these challenges. And Rob later on is going to talk a little bit more about some of the progress that we've made in establishing that framework and that platform. And he'll be talking about a landing page that we've published today, which basically surrounds that whole theme. But I'll leave Rob to talk about that later. But in the first instance, I'd like to really take this opportunity to introduce Victoria, who's going to introduce us to COP26 and the challenges it is seeking to meet. So Victoria, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Kia ora koutou, everybody. I'm in sunny Auckland this morning. Well, it's a pleasure to be part of this panel and lovely to meet everybody virtually. So thank you, and good evening to everybody else who is in the UK. Can I have my slides up, Billy, please? Thank you. So as Peter's kindly introduced me, I'm the Pacific Regional Climate Change Advisor with a specific remit of looking forwards to the COP26 milestone. I work out of the British High Commission in Wellington, but cover the whole of the Pacific region under my work. Next slide, please, Illy. So COP26 is, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it's the 26th meeting of that. And I guess for those who are really unfamiliar with the COP process, it's a gathering of up to 30,000 people come together every year to, I guess, negotiate ways in which countries can be more ambitious on climate action, but also there's a gathering of non-state actors, anybody from governments through to local government councillors, business people, public come along, as well as charities and organizations to, I guess, discuss across a whole range of subjects, what we call all sectors and all gases, to think about how they can contribute to the journey of to get to net zero under the Paris Agreement. Alok Sharma is our COP26 president designate, the UK as presidents of COP26, and the COP26 will be held in Glasgow from the 2nd to the 12th of November this year. I guess how we've approached COP26 this year in light of the COVID pandemic is using COP26 as an opportunity to build back better from the COVID pandemic and putting climate change at the heart of everything that we do. Next slide, please. So the aim, there's 3 aims of COP26 that the presidency has set. One of them is around building back and using the international community to build back better from COVID-19. And that's sort of bringing the international community together at COP to reach agreement, to accelerate action, to reduce emissions, strengthen adaptation and resilience, which is a really fundamental campaign for us, scale up the support through access to finance, putting nature at the center of some of the decision making, and ensuring that everybody comes along by empowering that inclusive action. In terms of the negotiations, it's about finalizing what we call the Katowice rulebook. This is looking at how we finalize the transparency, access to markets, carbon markets, and also the subject of loss and damage. But also, I think we want to use Glasgow really as that platform to demonstrate that we can come back from COVID-19 with that sort of focus on clean, low carbon growth. And this is sort of the story that we want all governments across the world to consider when they're setting their budgets for the next financial year, so that the path that they're forging in building back better is a pathway to zero carbon, rather than locking in that high carbon fossil fuel pathway, which will take us off that zero carbon. Next slide, please. So it's a huge challenge, and actually the challenge that the UK's got, people have said there's no better country to be hosting COP26 than the UK, having come through a pandemic, to keep the momentum going, as we sort of, we're still uncertain what the future holds. But we're not doing it. It's not going to be done easily. There are significant challenges to taking on the presidency. And I guess the biggest challenge is COVID-19. We're still in a pandemic. New Zealand, we're very lucky. We're living life as normal, actually. We're going to concerts, we're having face-to-face meetings. We can go shopping, we can stand next to people without masks. It's really bizarre, but the rest of the world is still struggling with COVID-19, and that's a big challenge. And how do we overcome that to maintain focus on climate change and climate action? The next challenge is the ambition gap, and there is an ambition on the mitigation side. There's an ambition on finance, and there's an ambition on adaptation and resilience. You can't deal with one separately. They're all combined. So basically, the ambition on mitigation, this is the gap that currently exists in countries' nationally determined contributions. So that's the goal that each country sets for their 2030 target to reduce emissions by. Huge gap. The gap in those NDCs is equivalent to the emissions that currently come out of China and India and the US combined. So we need to ramp up action on mitigation. The ambition on finance. Currently, countries have set the pledge of delivering $100 billion a year of climate finance to developing countries. The shortfall of that is $21 billion a year currently. That's before we set the target for the next 5 to 10 years of what countries should be pledging on climate finance. And then there's the ambition on adaptation and resilience. And one of the things that the UK is fundamentally shifting is the focus on adaptation away from mitigation, so that it's an equitable distribution of finance and effort to helping countries deal with their needing to adapt to climate change, which is happening right now on the ground. And then the challenge of negotiations, of course, bringing 196 parties together to reach agreement on issues which are particularly challenging in themselves. And that's all wrapped up with the public expectation that I think we're coming out of COVID with a much higher expectation that countries, that governments will actually take ambitious action on climate change. So the world is watching and we have to get it right. You can skip over the next couple of slides. I've left them in the slide pack so that people can come back to them. But this is the ambition gap, and it's just a pictorial representation of what we need to do, what countries need to do in order to get to that level of 1.5 degree warming. Next slide. And this is the finance gap. This is really just showing that actually there is this huge $21 billion gap per year in the climate finance that's being pledged by developed countries to help developing countries transition. Next slide. So every COP president gets to set a number of campaigns of which they feel important, and they're called global campaigns. And the UK has set themselves 5 campaigns: adaptation and resilience, energy, transport, nature, and they're all underpinned by finance, because without access to finance and without clean investment, we can't actually deliver on all the other campaigns. So I'll go through very briefly. I've got slides on each of these, and I'll go through very briefly. But I've left, there's lots of detail in the slides. Don't be put off. I'm not going to talk to them all, but they're there in case anybody wants to refer to them later. Next slide, please. So adaptation and resilience. Basically, the overall objective for the UK and what we're trying to achieve globally is, as I said, is this need to shift the balance. Currently, 95% of all finance goes into mitigation, and only 5 to 10% goes into adaptation. We want to make that more equitable, and we're asking countries to think about it as a 50-50 split, so that we need to shift that focus, and hopefully in shifting the focus of finance, we're going to shift that focus to think about more innovation, more expertise, and the step change that's needed to help countries who are on the front line of climate change right now. There are priorities. I'm not going to go into them though, but they are there if you're interested. Next slide, please. The energy campaign. So this is really about shifting away from coal, or what we call powering past coal, to a 2050 clean economy. And one of the things that the science is telling us is that in order to transition globally to meet the Paris Agreement goals, we need to shift into clean power 4 times faster than we're currently doing. It's not that we don't have the technology is there, we're just not seeing the uptake across the world. So the emphasis for our energy campaign is to really disinvest from fossil fuel and coal and to invest in clean technology and energy. Next slide, please. Transport campaign. So transport campaign, particularly here in New Zealand, this is quite pertinent actually, because the growth in transport emissions has been phenomenal over the last 10 years. More people having more access to cars, they're cheaper, and so people are using them more. From a UK's perspective, we want to shift people out of their current internal combustion engine cars, get them into clean energy cars, but also shift their mentality from not swapping from like from a diesel car into an electric car, but actually getting them out of the car altogether and giving them ideas and in order to get down to zero emissions from the transport sector. Next slide, please. So the finance campaign. This is about ensuring that the green transformation happens from an investment perspective and greening the finance system. So it's everything from how you invest from your pension fund or your KiwiSaver to how big business invest in new company and new technologies. So it's about moving away from fossil fuel investments into clean investments. And there's no shortage of money in the world. It's just about how we're using that money. And the campaign is about getting people to rethink how they're using that money. And it's not just about investment, but it's investment in innovation and technology, as well as investment in companies and startups and things like that. Next slide. So this brings me on to the nature campaign, and I think this is where it's really most pertinent to the group that are on the webinar. So the nature campaign, one of the things that the science tells us is that nature can provide up to 30% of the cost-effective mitigation solutions by 2030, but we're just not recognizing that. And so it's really important for us to put nature at the heart of some of the thinking that we're doing, because if we're going to actually get to a 2030, 2050 zero carbon world, we need to protect and restore the nature that we've got. And that goes all the way through from forests through to agriculture and land use. So I'll just go into a little bit more detail about why the nature campaign is really important and how it fits in potentially with some of the work that we want to do through GroundUp.earth. Next slide, please. So through the nature campaign, we're encouraging the mobilization of political commitment to put that nature-based solutions for climate change included in countries' national plans. In nationally determined contributions, nature doesn't feature. So we want to see that more brought into those at a more high level. We're getting leaders to sign up that they pledge to put nature-based solutions at the front and center of everything they're doing on climate change. We want to scale up financial support for nature-based solutions and have nature-positive investment. Create new dialogues between agriculture producers, the consumers, innovators, and financiers to help, reduce deforestation in supply chains, but also to rethink the agri-food sector and put sort of the sustainable food systems at the heart of our thinking as well. So we've got a sort of something called the Just Rural Transition, which is helping the rural sector rethink how they work. Next slide, please. And that's where the agriculture innovation comes in to the conversation. So this is about transforming the agriculture innovation systems, or transforming agri-food, the agri-food system. And one of the things the UK is doing and working really hard on is putting the needs of both smallholder farmers, which actually make up a greater proportion of employers in the agri-food space, but also getting governments and food producers to rethink how they're producing food and how they're investing in food production per se. So we want to mobilize international commitments for finance. We want to mobilize international commitments for development and innovation. And we want to catalyze investment into what we call climate resilient food systems. And some of this hopefully you'll kind of see yourselves in. So this is about reinvesting public funding, so government money towards sustainable food systems. So this is regenerative agriculture. This is about looking after the land for future generations. We want to, it's about getting groups of people together to rethink the technology and the practice that we need for a low carbon food production system. And in so doing, showcase new business models, showcase new technologies, showcase new practices that are scalable rapidly to help us deliver on that net zero commitment. And I think that's my last slide. Illy, do you want to see? Oh, this is just a plug, just a very quick plug for Race to Zero, which is where non-state actors can actually join the club for setting zero emission targets. And it's something that the UK is championing. But thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, very much for that. I think that provided an excellent kind of backdrop to exactly what COP26 is all about, and particularly the impact of agri-food. Those last few slides, I think, are very useful. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you've got questions that you would like to ask, there is a Q&A function available. Depending on the device you're using, it's either at the top or the bottom of your screen. So please ask questions. And what we'll do following Rob's presentation is basically just focus on those questions. And the other thing that we'll also be doing is we will be sharing the 2 decks that you will see, so that following the call, you'll have an opportunity both to see Victoria's PowerPoint deck in more detail and also Rob's. But I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Rob, who I know is sitting in central London, probably not quite as easy to go to restaurants and bars as it is here in New Zealand. But Rob, look forward to hearing your presentation over the next few minutes.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Victoria, for a really good debrief on what's going on. I found that fascinating. We've only got a couple of weeks to go, Peter, before the pubs open here. So we're on our best behaviour for now. This is a really exciting moment in history, arguably, and without trying to put too much gloss on this, there is a lot going on out there, and it's very exciting times for food industry and farming industry together to start to rethink collectively what's going on. At the Oxford Farming Conference at the beginning of the year, I put together a presentation that was all about collaboration. But the problem is that collaboration is an easy word to say, and actually, in reality, a very hard thing to do. And so Peter and I really got our head together that we really wanted to achieve something that had a meaning, had a purpose, that took this to a different level. And we felt that how do you generally get proper collaboration between entities, and wherever those entities are around the world, whether it's New Zealand or the UK or Africa, Asia, anywhere, how do we optimize and make sure and get things to work collectively? And the problem is that we all work in silos too much, and everyone's guilty of this, be it at national level or a department in a business or even a government institution. And so what we've come up with here is a brand new way to think about this. It works in a very interesting way and in a completely new way. Next slide, please. So, and the next slide. So what we're talking about is how to measure and reward collaboration for an individual. So that individual is a person. It's not the company. It's not the department they're working in, wherever that is. It's the individual. So if you can imagine, we all have a individual credit score. So how we behave with money, and the way that we might pay off a loan or even a large debt like a mortgage, that affects our credit score, and it's digitally captured and constantly is there for us. And it's a digital ledger, if you like, of what we're doing. And this is actually, the idea here is to create the same thing. So how can we find a way to constantly be looking at what people are doing and helping each other then to work together in a way that then measures that? And the key here is that we're creating a set of status. It's not something that can go backwards. It starts at 0 for everybody. But it works in the way that the more you collaborate, the more points you get. And the more points you get, the more you collaborate. It's a very positive place. It's not about taking points off you if you don't pay off your loan, if you like the equivalent to that. But it is an individual, and it goes wherever you are, whatever country, whatever company, whatever business you're part of, whatever department of the government you're part of. It is your individual score. Next slide, please. And the key thing is here, to make this work, Victoria gave some really massive numbers. This challenge is absolutely epic, and we've got to find a better way to do what we're doing now. It isn't going to work as it is now. The collaboration is not there. It's too siloed. So we have to have a system that doesn't have borders, it doesn't have boundaries. It's not restricted by your qualification or where you're from or who you're working for. It's actually only restricted by your ability to contribute and collaborate, and you're measured, therefore, by the team you're working with. We want to create worldwide problem solvers in a cloud. If there's one benefit from COVID, it's taught us to work online as a team. And this is the thing that we do now quite routinely. And that's part of where it came from. So if there's any benefit to the world of COVID that's made us work from home and look at screens all day, is that we start to really understand how to work in this way as well. Next slide, please. So what we want to do is to reward those problem solvers as individuals, whoever they are, the well-known, the less well-known. But with that, how do you do that? So we've chosen 3 ways people can contribute. And the crucial thing is here, you could be of any one of these. And my experience is that in life, and Peter and I, we talked this through, is that some people are really great at 1 or 2 of these, and some people are amazing at all 3, but you can be good at any one of them. And that could be your individual score on one of those, but it could be a combined of all 3. And how many people in life will be met that are just amazing connectors? Somebody that you meet and you say, you ring them up and say, do you know, I'm trying to fix this problem. And say, do you know somebody that will actually put me in touch with and connect and find this way through? And that person then gives you that great connection. And then you're able to say, thank you. Well, this is a system where this actually clocks that and records it. And not the actual connection, but it clocks the fact that that person's been a great connector. And that can keep going on. And each time what you're doing is rewarding people who actually are genuinely prepared to connect people. And this is all about building that ecosystem, again, with no boundaries, no borders, anywhere. So the crucial thing is here that the person that receives the connection then decides on how good that connection is. Now, we've also had situations when the connection's not been so great. So it's important to say it wasn't as good as we'd hoped or we thought it would be. So with that, our point here is that we are able to measure that on a scale of, say, 1 to 5, but 5 would be amazing, 1 would be a bit average. But this is a way to record that. That's one of the ways we're going to find ways to measure collaboration. Next slide, please. Now, the next one is, of course, we've all been in situations where we've been collaborating, be it in a business or be it in a department. And you always know that some people do more than others. It's just natural life. Well, in this situation, we'll be able to, as the team are working together, whoever that team is, no matter how big it is, it could be thousands of people trying to work on a solution, that the cloud of contributors measure who is contributing the most within that problem-solving issue. So in which case, somebody can make a small contribution, so a small point early on that has a big impact. And that should have a high level of points awarded to it, because that's what's happened. But that might be early on. Somebody else might do a lot more, but be small points. They equally could actually map to the same points. And this doesn't need then a partisan or a siloed approach, because anybody can contribute at any point. And they could leave at any point because they've got other things to do, or they just can't keep they've done their part. But at which point that will be recorded. So the contributors then are rewarded whatever stage they're at in the journey of solving that problem. This is a unique way of looking at it, because normally the last person standing is known as the contributor, the one that creates the solution. When in reality, that's not the case. Often tons of people are part of that entire chain of solving a problem. And what we're doing here is actually recognizing that and actually thanking those people. Next slide, please. Now, we've all been in situations where we've come up with an idea and there's a whole group of people working on that idea, and somebody comes along and says, guys, you've got to rethink this. This is going the wrong way. You haven't thought about this XYZ thing that's coming your way. And of course, those moments when that is a genuinely good situation, somebody spotted something that nobody else has spotted, is a critical time to go, wow, thank you. That was a great thing to think about that nobody else had done. So this is what we think is a really important part of the problem-solving process. Somebody that says, guys, we need to rethink this. And of course, the crowd that are working on that assess whether that's a good rethink. Now, it could be a lousy rethink, or it could be an amazing one, and that will be scored by the team working on it. We all need mismatches within this environment who say, you need to think differently about this, guys. It could be a lot better than it is, or there's something bad coming up that you haven't been aware of. So part of the three-way process here, we feel that these are crucial to how you develop a problem-solving process. Next slide, please. So what this is it could be a handful of people like this. It could be, how many PhDs does it take to solve a robotics problem in strawberry picking? Is it 60? Is it 600? Is it 6,000? Is this a way that we can then start to think about every little problem that needs to be fixed that Victoria mentioned? That collaboration, that means that we can actually combine resources in hundreds of different places around the world, but then solve it as one, not as individuals trying to win a race like a gold medal. That's not the way forward. The way forward is that we fix it together and we utilize the resources that are there everywhere. Next slide, please. So how we propose this works, there'll be a company or institution that will propose a prize. And so they define the problem, and it could be environmental, it could be technical, it could be some sort of human need, it could be whatever it needs, whatever they think is relevant. And based on the quality of that problem that's being put forward, a crowd will start to amass around that. And it could be a handful of people, it could be thousands. But with it, they'll have a prize. Now, the prize could be cash, it could be money, and the money will then be distributed amongst the crowd that solved it. But equally, it could be equity. Just imagine a startup or a scale-up business that's trying to solve a problem, and they go out to the industry, and just think of it. Just imagine that it's exactly the same way to do it for crowdfunding. They put up, say, 10 or 20% of the company to raise a sum of money, and then the shares are distributed to those people, or in whoever's contributed. It's exactly the same thinking, but for problem solving. So it's sweat equity on scale. And so you've got potentially people all around the world that could be building up portfolio shares, solving companies just by being part of that process. And it might be just a handful of shares because everybody's in a small part. So it could be a big amount. And that person could be anywhere in the world, from anywhere, and with any qualification, with any from whatever country they are. It's not limited by that. Our ambition is not suppressed here. So it could be cash, it could be equity. And the equity pay is particularly revolutionary. This is where a startup business can suddenly start to massively fix problems very, very quickly, take away all that bureaucracy and accelerate that process. Copy the crowdfunding system, but for crowd problem solving, and give shares in exactly the same way as crowdfunding. But crucially, when the problem is proposed, the proposer then decides when it's solved. And if it might take 5 minutes, it might take 5 months, we don't know. It depends on the problem. But the problem will be known as solved by the problem proposer. And that's the point at which the prize will be cashed out. So just like fundraising, it's the same principle. So the control of that process is in the hands of the proposer. Next slide, please. Over to Peter to explain the next steps here. This is a revolutionary move forward in how we can work together. There's lots of issues that are monumental, as Victoria's laid out. We're really excited of working together here. We hope you can join us. You'll find us more about us at GroundUp.earth. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob, for that introduction to GroundUp.earth, which of course is the big initiative behind a lot of the conversations that I've been having with Rob and other parties over the past few months. So we thought what would be helpful is if we provided a brief timeline to give the audience an opportunity to see what the next steps look like. And what we're going to be saying, I think, at the end of this call is that we really are keen that those people on this call can take part in this initiative. And we'll talk a little bit about how that will take place. So this month, we're launching the Agri-FoodTech Climate Summit. This is the first of several webinars that we'll be hosting over the coming weeks, which will be talking about different aspects of the agri-food tech climate issues. In April, we are going to be inviting key industry influencers to the global platform, and we'll also expect to confirm our first sponsors. In May, we'll be running our first test trials of the collaborative platform, and we'll be appointing our first brand ambassadors. So just to let people know that we are going to be using what I call existing technology to make this possible. It's not our intention to build a completely new platform from scratch, and we're just working through those opportunities at the moment. By June, we'll be in a position to confirm the agenda for the Agri-FoodTech November Summit, which, as Victoria said, will be taking place in Glasgow. And that is likely to be both in person and virtual. Obviously, with COVID still rampant around the world, we're not sure exactly who can travel at that time of the year. So there will definitely be a significant virtual event that we'll host. And then in July, we'll be moving more towards opening up application tickets, also a wider recruitment of sponsors for the event. And then finally in September, we'll be recruiting or developing a fresh wave of recruitment for attendees, and then final recruitment of attendees will finish in October in time for the summit in November. The one thing I would want to make clear, though, is that the summit itself in November is not a destination, it's a milestone. The program that Rob's been describing, the GroundUp.earth, is a multi-year function. So it's not going to end at November. November, we will hopefully have our first few projects running. And so we'll be able to share information about how those projects are going. But the intention behind GroundUp.earth is it's a long-term platform and collaborative model framework whereby agribusinesses, researchers, as I mentioned before, startups and investors can work together to address some of the really big challenges that Victoria talked about when she talked about the challenges that COP26 are trying to address. So it's a fairly exciting timeline. I've already advised the team that I'm having to cancel all my winter ski trips because there's a lot to do in what is a relatively short space of time. But really at that point now, I'd like to ask Illy if you can just take off the share screen. And that's the final platform. And we're now going to move into Q&A. So as I mentioned before, if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A facility, which is either at the bottom or the top of your screen. I'll start just by opening up the first question. I think the first question I saw is really directed at Victoria. So if Victoria, I can ask you this question. Great presentation, Julie says, Victoria. I understand the initiatives under the Nature campaign. The question is, I work in the sustainable diet space in the UK, and obviously there is a link between the ability to protect nature and biodiversity and reduce deforestation with agriculture and food systems. How is the UK climate change working with those promoting the support of more sustainable diets in food service and with at-home sectors directly with consumers? How can we get involved in the climate resilient food systems campaigns?
Fantastic. So thanks for the question. So the COP26, the Sustainable Agriculture Campaign and the Nature Campaign is actually working collaboratively with the Food Systems Summit, which is the UN Secretary General's. Every year, the UN Secretary General chooses a subject which he hosts a summit on. This year, it is food systems, and that summit will take place in July in Rome. And basically, the UK is co-hosting that event, and it takes a sort of an end-to-end approach on the food system. So it's not just about food producers, it's actually about ensuring that the conversation is around nutrition, health and well-being, as well as sustainable production. So what we talk about is sustainable production, sustainable consumption, and working with health providers and ministries of health in countries, as well as ministries of agriculture and ministries of environment, to ensure it's a package approach. So UK is in the UK, all the ministries involved in food are working together. I can share some details, more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Victoria, for that response. The second question comes from Michael, and I think I'm probably best placed to answer this question. And the question is, how do you see all this linking to the Farm 2050 initiative? And so for those of you who don't know what the Farm 2050 initiative is, basically at the back end of 2014, Eric Schmidt, who was then chair at Google, established an initiative called Farm 2050 through his investment vehicle, Innovation Endeavor. Basically, as you can probably tell from the term 2050, even back in 2014, it was recognized that we needed to produce more foodable form, nutritious food rather, by 2050 to basically to populate and feed a growing world. Since then, a number of major venture firms have joined Farm 2050. So today it's really led by Innovation Endeavor and Finisterre Ventures, a firm based out of San Diego. And they've brought together a number of global investors, including Rabobank, the Irish Sovereign Fund, Foreland Capital, and a host of other venture firms that I'm familiar with, both in North America in particular, and also Europe. But on the flip side to the Farm 2050 investor team, you also have a number of global agribusinesses. So people like Bayer Crop Science and Syngenta, Corteva, PepsiCo, Mars. And the question therefore is, how do we see all the work that Rob and myself have been discussing linking into that Farm 2050 initiative? Well, the good news, as Rob said, is this is all about collaboration. And as recently as 24 hours ago, I was speaking to Ara Makukatai, who is the co-founder and principal at Finisterre Ventures. And over the coming days and weeks, we will be talking to a number of those Farm 2050 partners on both the investment side, but also the agribusiness side, to see how they can best engage with this initiative. The initial response I've had is very positive. Right now, we're just generating some collateral which we can share with those types of partners. But if this is going to have a truly impactful effect, then we do need to engage with just those sorts of partners. So it's all part of that whole collaborative framework. So to answer your question, Michael, how do we see this linking into the Farm 2050 initiative? I would say hopefully very directly, and we should get some, I think, very positive feedback in the coming weeks. There's a question here which I'm going to hand over to Rob, and this comes from, if you just bear with me 1 second, James, and it says, thanks Peter and team. Which countries, e.g. one developed and one developing, are leading the way on low carbon, climate resilient food systems?
No pressure or political moment to take a stab there. In the farming food context? I can't see the question. So is it farming context or food?
It appears under chat. It's from James.
Yeah.
Which countries? Again, Victoria may also like to add to the answer.
I think the countries that are leading in biological stimulants that are replacing ag chems in farming are the US, but Europe, definitely UK is absolutely rapidly adopting this too. I know of a leading agronomy firm in the UK. The technical director confirmed that they are looking at over 220 biological stimulants, of which they're selling 20, to ultimately will be replacing traditional ag chems, which have a huge carbon footprint compared to biostimulants, or almost none. And when you look at some of these algae-based treatments, they're actually consuming CO2. So I think that is really exciting. I've always been a big fan of Kenya because of its ability to develop tech particularly the electronic wallet parts, and I think within phones, and I think the potential to link up essentially financial services with ag tech innovations in developing countries has enormous potential impact in climate change, because of how then we can monitor what's going on, as in not we, as in they can monitor what's going on and integrate their cropping systems with agronomy innovations that then will be able to accelerate that going forward. So I would say I'm going to be section out a country. But then there are big tech solutions, and Australia and New Zealand are very good at that, particularly Australia, where they're looking at really big stuff that wouldn't really suit some of the land that's here in the UK, probably better suited to Brazil and central areas of North America. So it's an impossible question to answer really, but I think what is exciting is that we are seeing some innovations that are absolutely dramatically changing the carbon footprint of what's been previously done. There's no-till, regenerative thinking, and then using technologies, smart sensors to measure, for instance, biologicals in soil to avoid, then learning best practice and applying that across machine learning platforms. This area is being done already in many other sectors of the industry, and now farming is starting to adopt them. The key is that we make it very useful and understandable to the farming industry. And this, we want to simplify a complex problem. So the implementation of that is to be simple, not complicated. The best ideas will be the simplest, not trying to be clever. So being clever is being simple here. And where we're seeing that is great. So you're reducing user interfaces and making one user interface that aggregates and works across all different platforms. That's where that's happening. That's great. That's happening here in the UK and in the US. So yeah, I think this what we're creating is an army of innovators here, an absolute army. We need an army of innovators to solve these problems, and that's why we're doing this.
Thanks, Rob. I don't know whether, Victoria, there's anything you want to add to that. I think that was a very comprehensive answer, bearing in mind probably slightly a left field question, but if not, I'll carry on then with the next question. This actually, I think, is probably more focused again towards myself. This is from Emmeline. Emmeline, I know extremely well. She's from Space here in New Zealand. And Emmeline says, we're planning a climate change focused challenge for New Zealand, Australia, and the Pacific Islands, leveraging space related technologies this year. We're still working on the final problem statement of the challenge. My question is, in the light of agriculture being front and center in the climate change emergency, which specific problem areas in New Zealand agritech should we best address and focus on that would contribute towards those goals and contribute towards the goals of COP26? Thanks. So I think that's probably, Emily, in a conversation we can have offline. But I'll just give you one example of, again, one of the reasons why I'm so energized by the whole project that we've been discussing. Recently in New Zealand, we have our own Climate Change Commission, and they produced some modeling data. And some of that modeling data was based on the fact that, particularly relating to methane gases, no technology solution would be available before 2035 to address those methane challenges. And obviously, as a country with a lot of livestock, methane is a key issue. And I found it quite challenging, the fact that a set of models could be produced on the assumption that no new technology would be available by 2035. And so that would be, for me, an absolutely classic opportunity for this project, to be able to pull together researchers around the world to look at a very specific problem. Because clearly, just in the New Zealand case, if we could address that and come up with some good solutions around methane, then that would enable us to accelerate some of the other proposals that the Commission have made. Just one or two other comments here that are appearing now on Q&A. Another comment from Julie. Absolutely love the GroundUp.earth principles, Rob. Embodies the principles of SDGs, healthy, sustainable business practices, and healthy, happy people. When does it start? Now, I gave a basically brief outline, but I think the best way to start, it actually starts today. What we've done is we have published a landing page at GroundUp.earth. That is the URL that we'll be using going forward. So the whole initiative is going to be called GroundUp.earth. And if you go to that landing page today, there is an opportunity to enter some of your details, also to ask you the question as to which problem or challenge do you think is most significant that you would like to see the platform address. And once you've done that, we will then contact you going forward as we begin to roll out the platform. So you can actually join the community as from today, and we'll be socializing that detail more extensively over the coming coming days and weeks. A question here from Paul, and again, I think this, Rob, is one for you. From an IP point of view, do you envisage challenges and solutions to be fully open or confidential?
Do you know that the interesting thing here is that we haven't got all the answers, and I think it needs to be, if we're having a collective solution, we only need to have a collective way of thinking that is agreed. I suspect in some instances, for instance, if you're a startup that's prepared to sell equity for have that problem solved, that there's confidentiality issues around that IP, then that's been generated. I mean, the people that solve it will get part of the IP, will be part of that IP. So in reality, that it might be that it is some are confidential. Where there's a prize from a large organization like Microsoft or whoever it is that decides to try and solve a big problem very quickly, then that might be public, because the quicker it's solved, the better. So we're going to work this through, and the purpose here of this is to welcome in people to help us and work together. This will be a social enterprise. This isn't our Peter and Rob's limited corporation to try and make money. This is going to be for everybody to use, and it's going to be for all. So it'll be governed by a team that are volunteers initially, to then start to lead and make decisions about that. Ultimately, it's going to be a meritocracy that will reward people for their contribution and to be governed by itself.
Yep, I think
there's a question. There's a question from Simon Yarrow there as well, Peter. But
yeah, I was just going to say. So thank you, Simon, for that question. The question for those that can't see it is: are you seeing much change in the finance industry regarding giving better terms, e.g., debt finance for organisations meeting environmental or carbon targets? And that might be a question for you, Rob, and also one, Victoria, that you would also like to.
Yeah. I'd sort of, it's aligned with something I said earlier, but there are now more and more banks that are particularly focused in ag innovation. So finding ways to do this together with banks. There's a number of them appearing. There's a lot of funds coming forward, investor funds. It's probably the biggest it's ever have been. The scale of the growth in ag food investments has grown by 34% last year, according to Ag Funder, and it's gone from a very relatively low base 10 years ago to now, and it's doing that. So there's a lot of money out there to be invested, but the key thing here is what is the worthiness of the idea, and what we're finding is that we're particularly in developing countries, that if you can create that credible history around the transactions you're doing with the new technologies that are happening, then you will start to get the finance that business deserves. We take it for granted in developed countries on how we raise debt because of our declared income, whereas in developing countries, this is a thing that's been holding them back ever since day one, and now that could change. So there's going to be a great deal of movement around how innovation is funded and how then people then use finance to fund the implementation of that. Victoria, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks, Peter, and thanks for the question. So I've hosted a breakfast here this morning in Auckland, and one of the speakers is the head of sustainability for the Bank of New Zealand, who have just actually given their first loan to a farmer here in New Zealand that's linked to their sustainability credentials. So it's actually cheaper for the farmer to borrow money because he's fulfilling a certain set of sustainability criteria. And one of the things is that New Zealand is way behind the ball here. I think sort of 3 or 4 years ago, when I was at COP in Marrakesh, Morocco, the likes of Rabobank were already doing this. They were already thinking about how to make loans cheaper for farmers who actually want to get to a low carbon footprint, or become more sustainable, or put regenerative agriculture at the heart of their farming practice. So yeah, so definitely there is a movement, not nearly quick enough, which is one of the things that the UK is promoting through its finance campaign, and working with all the major banks, all the major lenders around the world to say, this is the way forward, make it cheaper for farmers who are doing the good things. Yeah.
There we go, just take myself off mute. I'm going to thank you very much, both Rob and Victoria, for your answers. I'm going to add just one more bit of context to that. As I mentioned, I am currently speaking to a number of venture firms in the US, and one that I spoke to earlier this week told me that last year they asked all their portfolio companies to come up with a climate sustainability strategy, and that became an investment requirement. So any future investment that they may be looking at has to have a climate and sustainability approach to their work. Otherwise, there won't be that investment. So I think that is also demonstrating how the venture community is beginning to take climate much more seriously. And certainly the same applies to family offices, where I think a study quite recently announced that, or of global family offices, said that climate change was now their most critical issue. And I think that in some ways just reinforces the importance of the discussion we've had today. Now, we've got just 2 minutes left, and I'm going to finish off with this one final question. Thank you, incidentally, everybody, for the questions. We will try and get back to you. If we've not answered them via this call, we'll get back to you directly. But this is from Ronald, and I'm going to pose this to Victoria. I would like the panelists, in this case, Victoria, how they envisage the likelihood of meeting the goals set by the COP nations to the transition to net zero in such a relatively short time frame, with the likes of the EU Green Deal placing very ambitious targets, again, in the short time scale, namely 2030 as a target for a lot of goals.
Yeah, that's the number one question that we're hoping that innovators like yourselves are going to help us solve. So basically, governments have set themselves these massively ambitious targets. The UK has set itself the goal of reducing emissions by 68% by 2030. Sending that signal to the marketplace will hopefully enable innovators, creators, investors to come together to help us solve how we're going to get there. The solutions, some of the solutions are available, they just need to be scalable, but in many places the solutions haven't yet come to the fore in terms of livestock agriculture, for instance, but also, there's a lot of opportunity there. So we're definitely looking to the market to help us deliver.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And I think that's probably a very good way to finish this first session of what will be many sessions over the coming weeks. I'd like to thank both Victoria and Rob for joining me today. Very, very great to have you online. And I'm sure we'll be speaking again, both in person and online over the coming weeks. For everybody else who's joined the call, thank you very much for your time, either this morning or this evening, depending on which time zone you're living in. I have to say we have had a very good global audience and representing a number of different global regions. And finally, just to remind people that if you want to get more information about the initiative, please go to GroundUp.earth, the website, register your interest, and we'll make sure that you're kept fully up to speed with developments as they take place over the coming weeks. So kia ora from New Zealand, and I wish you either a good day or a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for Peter for organising it. Thank you for everybody listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Thank you.